Mach 3, give me crew show on 2, 3, and 4.
Line 1, exit 1.
6, 3. Mach 3, give me start line 2.
5 electric. Mach 3. Line 2, Mach 9.
Mach 3, give me start line 1 and crew show on 7 and 9.
Line 1, crew show 7 and 9, Mach 9.
Yeah, do something. I hate weapons.
Super Op, line 3, red ball, avionics.
Super Ops. Line 4 is code 3 for engine vibe.
Hey, so I started a Patreon because frankly, this stuff's getting expensive. Nothing will change the podcast or the blog if you don't subscribe, but if you want early access to episodes, monthly AMAs, episode shoutouts, voting on podcast topics, and all kinds of 20 Years Done gear, head over to patreon.com/20yearsdone. This month's top tier Patreon shoutout goes to Robbie Walker, Travis Barnes, Kevin Traw, JT Owens, Delinda Baker, and Matt Jones. Thanks for the support. Okay, so today we're joined by Mark Adams, somebody that I served with at Luke Air Force Base from probably like 2000. Well, we really only got to know each other around 2013. We were both kind of operating at the group level, but we probably served together without realizing it for probably 3 or 4 years. And then I went to Holloman, and then Mark went where he went. But he was a guy that had a very particular and well-utilized skill set at Luke Air Force Base, which is why I asked him to come on today. So if you could just give like a quick background on your career, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I appreciate you letting me be here. I joined the Air Force back in really early '01, and then I was a jet engine mechanic, was the job I got assigned in basic training. So I spent my airman years, if you will, out on the line, serving at Kunsan and Misawa on the F-16s. And I really enjoyed the troubleshooting aspects, the kind of really up close to the mission aspects during that time frame. And then I went to Luke in around '07 and served in the engine back shop there. So it gave me both flight line and back shop experience all around, engine maintenance.
So, but when I met you in 2013, I knew you were an engine mechanic because I think we had talked mechanics and stuff. But that wasn't your position anymore. You were, you had a very specific position, correct?
Right. So in 2008, the engine shop flight chief pulled me aside and said I was going to be the new lean guy for the shop. I had no idea what lean guy was, but essentially he was saying, look, really we have an IG inspection coming up and you can't officially have an IG prep person. So you're the lean guy person and you're going to prep for the IG. And I was so frustrated because I always got that role, the IG prep person. And I wanted somebody else to do it, but I did it. We did really good. And then I was like, well, what's my job now? And so I started researching what lean was, went to academics, and then really learned that it's essentially just like mechanic troubleshooting, but it's
Right.
Process troubleshooting.
Yep.
And so I fed into that so quickly and started working a lot of process improvement initiatives that I really had to go out on my own to try and get done just so I could earn my certifications. But one thing led to another. And then, I went from flight to squadron to group to wing, running process improvements throughout.
Yeah. So did you ever have any pushback on the process improvement that was there a stigma? Because I know when process improvement came around, like I joined in 1998 and there was an initiative in the early to mid 90s that was really unpopular. And I suspect it didn't employ all the process improvement sort of elements, which ultimately led to its negative sort of stigma. But there was a lot of pushback and I didn't know any better. So typically in the aircraft maintenance community, people are defaulted to suspicious and negative. And when this came around, the older gearheads had all just immediately tied it to the mid 90s sort of program. And I got the sense that you and others like you probably had a lot of community. I mean, it sounds weird to say community outreach when you're at your local base, but that's probably what happened. Is that right?
So yes, what you're referring to was that whole TQM-QAF, Total Quality Management, but the Air Force had to put its own name on it, so they called it Quality Air Force.
Right.
And that led to, a lot of what was called paralysis analysis, right? where we were doing so much analyzing of data that nothing was really ever done. And people were really fed up with how much time it was taking to analyze things. And so that led to that pushback, if you will, against this whole thing. So when Lean was reintroduced back into the Air Force, it was under the name AFSO 21, Air Force Smart Operations for the 21st Century. And that was done in about 06, 07 timeframe. So I didn't really know anything about it until 08. But that was one of the very first lessons they taught us. Be prepared for the pushback. People are going to think it's this. Really, this is what we're doing. We're more about rapid change. And even the chief of staff, that's the new kind of mantra, right? Change or die, right? You got to have that rapid change. And that's what it was about. So once people started realizing that, yes, some of the tools might be the same, but the execution was a little bit different, I think that started generating fans. But again, you had to get them to see it, and then they had to see it firsthand. So that was the struggle. And really, the only way you were going to overcome that was just by doing your job.
Yeah. So I imagine some early victories, some early sort of successes probably went a really long way in validating both the program plus you as a facilitator, which probably contributed to the rise. And I imagine there's a lot of process improvement opportunities in aircraft maintenance just because of the sheer magnitude. Everything's a process, right? Like the TO is a process, tool room's a process, roll call, shifts. I mean, there's so many processes, right? And there's a lot of opportunity to do process improvement, which I suspect you had probably way more opportunities than you had resources to do process improvements. You likely had to do what's the most important, where can we make the most sort of impact on the mission, which probably, I suspect, contributed to your, consistent rise as a process improvement sort of facilitator and manager up to the wing level, right?
So sort of, I would challenge that a little bit. Yes, there's tons of opportunities. And I've always said a process is a process is a process. So in that case, exactly what you said, everything's a process, which means everything is open to process improvement. Even though there's so much opportunity, there's not so much desire like we were just talking about earlier. So I remember I really had to go just really focus what was in my span of control and what could I go target. So I remember the one that got me to the squadron level, they made me the fitness person. So I was scheduling fitness. And that job was so cumbersome because the tool that they were using was on SharePoint. And only one person could access the tool at a time. And so you'd come to work, the tool is locked for editing. By the time it's time to leave work, the tool is still locked for editing. You never get to use it unless you come super early or stay late. And I don't want to do that. So I figured that would be an improvement I would work on. And I looked at everything I was doing before I started my shift, and it was really unlocking the building, getting it open, ready for business. But there was this one task that took a really long time, and it was getting this computer booted up so it could run through a slideshow right outside the commander's office. Well, I was being obnoxious. I sent an email out to everyone saying that I fixed the process, right? I left the computer on all the time. So now all you got to do is just turn on the TV. You were good to go, but I get to access my file. But I sent the email out to everyone saying, if you come to work and I'm not here, this is how you unlock the building and get it ready. The commander saw it. He thought it was the dumbest thing that we had a TV right outside of his office because he asked everyone, he said, who's looking at this TV? The only people looking at the TV are people that are in trouble.
Yep.
The one standing outside the commander's office. And what's on the TV? This person won airman of the, this person won NCO of the, and this person is about to be in trouble is just looking at all the superstars and not feeling good about themselves. So he got rid of the TV, and that made the job even better. But that email is when, the commander said, hey, look, I like the way you think, come do this at the squadron level. But that was one of those initiatives I had to fight for my own. It wasn't just handed to me because there's lots of opportunities. You really had to establish credibility.
And I'll tell you what, if there's any commanders out there that are listening to this going, I have a TV outside my office full of awards and stuff, I will personally send you the video from episode 24 I did with Kevin Traw talking about recovering from adverse actions. And while your people are standing outside waiting to get in trouble, we can show a video of how they can recover their career. So let me know. I'll totally do that. But I think that's a really illustrative point where the process or the task might have been misidentified, and that's certainly part of the process improvement. Are we moving in the direction we're supposed to be moving? Because if you efficiently move in the wrong direction, you're still not improving the process. So like really framing the problem is the first step. So before I get too far ahead of myself, do you want to do a quick primer on what generally process improvements there are, the different types, and then also maybe just a quick peaks of start to finish what a process improvement plan looks like?
Right. So in the world of continuous process improvement, which is now what the Air Force calls it, CPI, there's many different methodologies that can be used. So primarily you have things like Lean, and then you have things such as Six Sigma. And if you wanted to dissect those two into really easy to understand things, Lean is all about reducing process waste, and Six Sigma is all about reducing variation. So putting that into Air Force terms, Six Sigma is how you get bombs on target continuously. And then Lean is how you meet that new chief of staff, mission statement that we have about aircraft anywhere, anytime, right? Or airmen anywhere, anytime. So reducing that waste lets you be able to be more efficient and more effective. And then reducing variation allows you to be on target more successfully, more repeatedly. The process improvement events that we're both talking about, those are opportunities to get with subject matter experts, process owners, and really being able to dissect what their process looks like through tools such as process mapping, and then really some analysis like either root cause or waste analysis, all to then be able to say, what is it that we can now do in the future to gain those efficiencies and better that effectiveness? And that then leads into hopefully just a small set of action items that they can go implement and then be able to see success with their initiative. Not every event's the same. Some are very big and large and can take months, if not years to do. Some can be very small. Some may require facilitators, some may not. So it's really, I always refer to this stuff as us facilitators, we're mechanics of broken processes. So we got to use the right tools at the right place for the right job and not necessarily standardize, using a hammer for everything.
So you kind of said that the quality Air Force in the 90s suffered from like a paralyzation of decision making where they were constantly trying to gather data. From my experience with continuous improvement, it's, what can we do with the information we have now to make this process better? But it's continuous. There's going to be a revisit. Did what we think would happen? Did it improve as much as we thought? And now we have new data on this new process, and let's tighten it up a little bit more. Did we create new ways with this process? So that, it seems so second nature. Maybe it's because I existed in that world, either mostly indirectly. I think I benefited a lot from process improvement. I didn't realize it. I was involved in a few, and we'll talk about those in a second, but that continuous improvement seems so innate. I just am flabbergasted that in the 90s that wasn't baked into the recipe for improvement. So I'm glad that we revisited, and I'm kind of glad that people like you overcame the initial resistance. You're paying off a debt from the program in the 90s. But I think me and you were actually involved. You may not remember this because I suspect you did a lot of continuous improvement sort of stuff. Me and you were involved in a process in, I think, around 2010, if that sounds right. And it was for streamlining the basic post-flight, pre-flight inspection on F-16s at Luke Air Force Base. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. Yeah, that was, it was such a small initiative. I didn't know that was the one that you were a part of. I know we've worked together and we've talked together on these.
Your opinion of me is way too high, because I was definitely on the lower initiatives for sure.
No, it's just so funny because I remember being laughed in the room because the whole thing is this stuff is not supposed to be, again, like you were just talking about, the so detailed oriented. So I followed a crew chief around on a basic post flight, right? And I just watched how he did everything. And I drew an F-16 on a piece of paper, but it didn't look like an F-16. It was essentially a triangle with wings. Mm-hmm. And then all the lines of how he went around and did his inspection. It was just so crazy. And so then I think you all had some idea of saying, but if you did it in this order, you wouldn't miss anything by the TO, and what would happen? And so then we redrew the lines. I shared it at the MXG executive staff, and no one cared about the lines. They cared about how ridiculous my F-16 looked.
Okay,
And
so that's missing the point.
yeah, and I was like, okay, so I don't have the vertical stabs or things like that. But regardless, this is what happened, and this is now what happens. And eventually they were like, oh, okay, let's look at this a little bit more. Let's do some more repeats and see if we can produce the same results. What happens to the quality rate, And so those were some follow-on questions. But I just remember being kind of laughed out of the room because of how horrible my F-16 looked. But I used that in all of my training after the fact to prove to people it doesn't have to be so specific. So I know people who would print out an F-16, front, back, sides, would take it and show everything and really kind of get the message across, but the amount of resources, tools, and time that took, that's again delaying the opportunity for improvement.
It's literally creating a wasteful process to streamline another process, is what you're saying.
Yes.
So here's what I'll say. When I went to that process improvement, I think that was certainly my first time being involved in process improvement. I think you were the facilitator. I remember you doing the fishbone diagram on the whiteboard. I remember a lot of the people in that room. I remember the senior airman that you were with. I think his last name was Hannah. He ended up going on to be a MRA instructor. He was the one you followed around, and he was given the airman's perspective. And what I think a lot of people didn't realize, and when I say people, I mean maintenance leaders, is there's this fairy tale that when a crew chief does a pre-flight that he's done, I don't know, 1,000 times, that he still is opening the book and going step by step, and he's walking. Because what Mark's saying here is the waste in this process predominantly was transportation or travel. You would be on the right wing and you move to the left wing and you move back to the right wing, and you would be up the jet and then down the jet, and then later on you'd be back up the jet again and you'd be down the jet. So there was all this inefficiencies baked into the step-by-step process. And I think a lot of people in supervision and management didn't understand or refused to acknowledge that waste, what that did was it incentivized people to not follow the book, because human beings by their very nature are a path of least resistance. When you have 12 hours, a crushing workload that night, and this pre-flight is between you and getting to the quote unquote real work, that if you can get it done, you can go home to your family. You are fully incentivized through that pre-flight as quick as you can, which is going to subconsciously drive an innovative mindset of, I'm going to walk around this jet once and I'm going to hit all these items. But the reality is you're not going to flip card to card to make sure you're hitting everything in these weird orders. So you would get young technicians essentially memorizing what they could, and I won't say it's the whole thing, and walking around, and they would do the exact same inspection, and everyone's doing a different inspection, which is very likely why you would get QA pass rates doing this weird sort of wave, because everyone's doing a different inspection. And when you're talking about aircraft maintenance, standardization is the hallmark of safety and quality. And so when you started going through, and you were not a subject matter expert on BPO pre-flights, you certainly knew maintenance, you certainly knew TOs, and you were just soliciting us, and it was like an open forum. I mean, it sounds corny, but I was sold pretty quick. So it's like, okay, this isn't BS. This is like legitimately, we're going to eliminate some waste. And what we ended up doing, the final product was, we took the entire TO, every single step, and we reordered it into a local checklist where you could flip it, and it was in the most efficient path. And then assuming we would revisit in, 6 months to a year or whatever to make sure it was still the most efficient. And unfortunately, due to the way the Air Force TO system is structured, they said you can't reorder an entire TO. You need to submit an AFTO Form 22, which goes to my second point of, how, you mentioned that the current Chief of Staff of the Air Force is talking about rapid change, accelerate, change, or lose, right? We're talking about a transformative time in the Air Force. And in my experience, the layers of bureaucracy in the Air Force creates this installation and resistance to rapid change. Like, that was exactly what I saw with that BPO pre-flight. It was great. You would be hard pressed to find a crew chief that didn't agree with it or didn't like it. I think the quality probably was going to trend up because people would be more compliant with the TO. Their time spent would be down. And the Air Force simply said, this isn't the way. I believe an AFTO Form 22 was submitted. I think I actually submitted it now that I'm thinking about it. And the Air Force came back and said, no.
Oh, see, I didn't know that. I did know we submitted the AFTO 22. I never knew what happened to it after the fact, on to the next initiative, if you will. And yeah, that's a bummer. I always told people that, AFTO 22 can be that final chance to change policy. And, AFIs can change. It may take a long time, but if you're really committed that this is the right change, then you stay committed and you follow the bureaucratic procedure. That sucks that they said no. And I don't even know what the value of saying no is, because they don't really come back and say why, right?
No, I mean, I think they said why. And man, I'm trying to reach back in my memory. I don't have this, obviously I don't have this saved anywhere. This was, 2000, whatever, might have been 2008. I might have been an instructor at the time. I can't remember for sure. But I think the response was no. And the explanation was really lame. And I legitimately got mad because it's like, I wasn't mad because I put the time in. I got paid the same, whether I was doing this or helping with this event. I was mad because I saw it as a genuine quality of life improvement that would also create a productive value. And it felt arbitrary. They just said no.
Well, and you go back to the comment that you made earlier, the crew chiefs are just going to do what they do anyways.
Correct.
And so on a single engine aircraft, you've got people that are doing what they think is just the best thing, in order to get to their families without necessarily putting themselves or anybody else in danger.
Yep.
But they can't do it by the book. It's too dumb to do it by the book.
Yeah. So when I talked to retired Colonel Vic Mora a few episodes ago, really kind of talking about his leadership style, where the very first thing he did was develop airmen was his number one. And his explanation was, if you can develop good airmen, all the other things are going to fall into place. But it's interesting, especially in the 2013 and certainly after 2013, when after force reduction further reduced our force, it's got to be really hard to balance a resource restricted environment, both in age of fleet, experience of personnel, amount of personnel, with process improvement. Because the reality is you followed Hannah around that day or multiple days. You pulled me and other people into a room to do that process improvement. So during that time, we were not doing our primary duties. Like, it was an investment, right? And that's what Vic Mora talks about. Invest in your people now, and it's going to pay dividends in the future. And I think the reality is, and I'm very guilty of this myself, in the moment, you always feel like there's not enough resources. And what you don't realize is 2 years from now, you very likely could have less, and you're going to regret not doing something the 2 years prior to help yourself. Did you ever run into issues where leaders or commanders were just not willing to support process improvement because of mission needs and things like that?
Sure. That came up all the time. And of course, you could always counter back with, look, if you have time to fix the errors, then you've got time to improve, right? But in the now and so forth, it's really tough. And I used to talk about this too. One of the things is we love firefighters. We love people who are going out there and fighting the fire of the day and solving the issue. But when you do continuous improvement, those fires tend to go away. And so now it looks like people are just sitting around. And so you don't want that kind of visibility. It's, what have I done to prove my worth and value around here? So you absolutely would get a lot of that pushback. And I always talked about it, it made sense because firefighters, they'll get a parade for saving a child out of a burning house or something. But they don't get a parade for checking the batteries in your smoke detector. It's really, what have you done to successfully, save something? And so it was a real balance. And that's when I'd go back to that span of control. What could I do? And I would work with a lot of, smaller sets of people. I remember I had this one initiative. I had a medical tech person on a initiative for flight line shift change. And when it was done, he was saying, wow, this was great. I've got so many things I'd like to work on. Well, if the maintenance group doesn't really want me doing anything because of this pushback, I'm going to go where there's pull, right? Where people are saying, come help. But I told them, I said, look, I'll come help, but it's tit for tat, right? You'll tell me what initiative you want, but I'm going to tell you what initiative I want, and you help me get that done. And so the one I wanted was the calling the appointment line, because our maintainers, they're out on the flight line, they barely get 2 minutes to eat. They don't have time to sit 15, 30 minutes trying to schedule an appointment for themselves, their spouse, or their child. And that was the one I wanted. And so that's what we did. So it's really about just being able to work within your span of control, take where people are giving you the opportunities and not try and force yourself down everyone's throat.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So is it possible to like overanalyze a process? I mean, we kind of talked a little bit where you can be paralyzed, but how do you as a facilitator, and I imagine this might be just experience or a gut instinct after a certain amount of time, how do you know when it's time to go from the process analysis and planning to, okay, let's birth this, and then we can start tweaking as we go? Like, how do you decide that? And it's probably specific to each one.
Well, so I think part of it is how I do my pre-event planning. When I do a time study or anything like that, a process evaluation, I usually will have a member who's going to be on the team do it with me. And this way it adds value. So when we do get in the room and we're process mapping and I say, well, then the person went and grabbed parts out of their locker, and the person in charge says, no, we don't keep parts in our locker. Well, the person who did it with me, the person who works in that facility and is part of this organization will say, no, I saw it. And it immediately establishes credibility. It doesn't look like I'm trying to blow smoke, and it allows for that engagement. So you don't have to do too much. I don't have to watch them disassemble an engine 20 times to really get an understanding. I can just watch it once and say, this is our sample, and kind of go from there. So yeah, I try to use subject matter expertise whenever possible and not do the time studies. And I know that's anti my industry, right? A lot of my peers right now would be like, what? But I've always been a little bit anti my industry. I'm the kind of person who says, we can't be hypocrites. We have to be willing to change our own processes. And so I try to use subject matter expertise whenever possible, especially if it's a low threat process that we're reviewing. And then if it's a high threat or very detailed process, I might do a time study, but I only try to do it once, and really try to minimize how much energy and effort is being put into this.
So what is a time study in particular? Can you break down just what a time study is for the listeners?
So I remember one of my first ones was on the engine, receiving the engine at the engine back shop at Luke. And so what it was is I had myself and I had someone who was on the team, and we watched them work the whole day. I had sheets of paper, and anytime, my counterpart, she watched, these people and I watched these people. So we wouldn't lose sight, and, we gave them unique identifiers. So it wasn't by names. It wasn't like Airman Johnny. I would use a skill level. So like 3A, 3B. So, if this was 3 level A, 3 level B, so forth, right? And anytime they moved from a task, I assume it's a new task, so I'd write it down and say, left the engine. And I don't know where they're going, but I start the stopwatch and, track where they went, to the toolbox. So I'd say 3A toolbox. And then how long were they there and when they go back? It's very, very detailed. And when you're talking about a process that takes 7 to 9 days and it's over multiple shifts, you have to be really organized. And so I know, like, my person on night shift, my counterpart, I was so frustrated because he called me up and said, hey, I'm not going to work tonight. And I didn't want to lose all the data. So I ended up having to work day shift and night shift just to be able to capture all of the data. But that's how committed I was to this. And I think that enthusiasm and that dedication is why people would listen and be supportive. So
I knew that happened, but I don't think I realized the level of granularity that would go into that. But just what you're describing, that sounds really intense for you. And I don't mean to sound patronizing. Like, I mean, anybody that's listening, I want you to, like, think about how much time it would take to stare at 2 or 3 people and then write down every single trips to the bathroom, breaks, lunches, move into the toolbox, move into the tool room, move into this, answering a phone call, checking email. like all of their day diary, like a time diary, that would be after 8 hours. It's like, oh, I didn't blink today is probably what I would feel like. And I think that's, and I can certainly see the value, but I can also see where it might be kind of what you said, where it's can't see the forest for the trees because you're so deep into the detail, you can't see the overarching picture, or recognizing that sometimes a little bit of waste is just going to happen. And does it really draw from the overall process improvements? That's a good point. I kind of get that. So I was wondering if you can tell me any of your, like, what are your best process improvement success stories, both either in the military, outside, or whatever. Like, I'm interested in what you did, and if you have any I'm sure you probably have quantifiable data of what that improvement was. I'm interested to hear it.
Yeah, I do have a portfolio. Anytime I'd go interview for a role or something like that, I had my portfolio of initiatives that I'm a big fan of, or I felt tied to, improvement opportunities. So even in the company I'm in now, I had that portfolio with me, and they weren't all maintenance. If you talk about my favorite ones, not all of them are maintenance, but they may have helped maintenance, like the appointment line one, right? That really helped out maintainers, so they're not waiting on hold. So I really valued just being able to be supportive to them. But no, if we were talking about some of the ones that I really valued the most, there's one that's actually in my shadow box right now. It's of initiative, and it was DUI prevention. And the reason why that one is probably so personal is, one, I mean, you're talking about saving lives potentially, and careers.
Right.
But I remember we had a person who was at the wing level, and the commander is like, hey, I'll buy into your process improvement stuff, if you can solve one thing. And I was like, sure, and it was solve DUIs. I was like, ouch, but everything's a process. Got the team together. We talked about it, figured out where we thought the issue was, put together a counter plan. DUIs at Luke had been averaging over the last 4 years before that initiative happened, 30 a year. And they were on the rise. It was like 28, 29, 30, 32. After that, it went from 14 down to 12, and it was on a decline. And such a huge drop. My goal for that initiative was to reduce DUIs by 2.
Oh,
so
wow.
To go from 30 to 28.
Yeah.
But we went from 30 to 14. It was huge, and I really enjoyed that. Some other ones that we've worked on that I've really enjoyed was honestly within my own field, and I think it's what got me a little bit more known, was I started applying continuous improvement to continuous improvement. And so one of the things I went after was the certification process for practitioners.
Right.
And we had a 30% progression rate. So everyone I would train, I'd get like 15 people in a room. I would teach them academics, and only 30% would progress to the next task that would get them certified. So maybe not certified, but just the next task to certification. Looked at the process, fixed it, changed it up, made it a little bit more effective, efficient, and got it to 92%. No one else in the Air Force was that high. And so I got to go speak, at AETC, I got to go speak at SAF, and really be able to showcase what it was that we were doing. So I really enjoyed that as well.
At that time, I think I was on a list to become, it was like the green belt. Like we went, but I also think it was like every senior NCO should be doing this. And it was like, it didn't feel like I was asked because of my skill set. I was asked because I was in this broad population, which made me immediately feel that it was a checkbox or mandatory, or wasn't really tailored. And then I just had a bunch on my plate. And tell you what, looking back, like I definitely, organically gleaned a lot of steps or processes from continuous improvement that I've used in my career and later on, but I really regret not doing something, getting my green belt and at least my green belt and progressing on. Like that's a legitimate regret. And here's my spiel for it. So initially I was resistant to it just because I think every maintainer is resistant to anything that's not, everything. And then I think it just had that stigma to it, and it was extra work. But now that I'm out, I'm gonna make 2 points. First, I wish I had it because I think I do have continuous improvement chops. I think that's what a lot of what this podcast is. It's recognizing deficiencies in organizations and going, this should be better. And I'm frustrated that it's not better. So I think I already have a mind for it, but so I enjoy it, but I'm lacking that certification. Like I would have to, and I think it's really, I don't know how expensive it is, but it would cost us a fairly significant amount of money for me to go and grab it. And then there's, much like you said, you can apply continuous improvement anywhere because you're not the expert. You're bringing in the experts and you're just asking pointed questions like, why are you doing that? Well, I had to go to get this tool. Why can't that tool be where you are? Like what prevents that tool from being, and those are like questions that they can apply in the medical field, construction field, aircraft maintenance, office. Why is the office supply closet on the first floor and everybody's working on the fourth floor? What can we do here? And I regret not getting that certification because, much like when we talked to Kevin Traw, he got his certification. He walked into a job for continuous improvement and then immediately moved up into eventually moved up to executive position. It's definitely a doorway that transcends all career fields and all sort of industry because everyone has a need for continuous improvement. That wasn't a question. Right. I'm just testifying, no. I guess.
Right. But I can speak to it as well. I didn't know what I got when I got handed to me, right? I thought it was IG prep. I was really upset. And when I went through Greenbelt Academics and I just connected, I was like, wow, this is great. But again, I've been one of those who's been a little bit against the grain. I remember with that very first engine initiative, my mentor, I told him, I was like, man, I'm really struggling to get this done. It seems too broad. And he's like, break it up into phases. And so we did. We broke it up into some bite-sized phases. And then that led me to really reevaluating how all of this is done, that there was no standardization, there was no requirement. And so I changed the way I did things. And so you talk about that fishbone diagram. I've since created my own facilitation method for the fishbone diagram that took the continuous improvement initiatives that we were doing before. They had a sustainment rate of, I don't know, maybe in the 20s. That now I have sustainment rates in the 90s. Mm-hmm. Another number that is just unheard of within the community to have something sustained. And I felt a lot of that was just because I started changing up our own processes. And again, this just got landed in my lap. I wasn't seeking it, but it truly has set me up. And I can't thank either the Air Force or the opportunity enough for putting it on the pathway I'm on now.
Yeah. So when I was at Holloman and towards the end of my career, 2015, I think, or 16, I went to a commander's call for the group commander, and he kind of chastised the whole audience. He said, 2 years ago when I took over this group, I had a commander's call. Apparently I didn't go to it because I don't remember this. He said, I had a commander's call, and I asked every single one of you to come to me and let me know things that you're doing that don't add to the mission so I can turn them off. And you know how many people have come to me? None. And I was like, oh, I don't remember this because I would have came to you because I got lots of problems and I want to talk about all of them. And I immediately went back to my office and I really sat down and tried to, I think I had like a legitimate laundry list of things that I wanted to change that I didn't know a pathway to do it. And this was a system that generated a whole lot of ancillary man hours, like components that were deep in the jet required the engine to be removed, reservoirs to be removed, leading edge flaps to be removed, ECS packages to be removed. All good components that have to come out just to replace this one part. And it turns out that part wasn't actually necessary to be changed for our jets. And it was very recreational. So, I mean, certainly it was not a formal continuous improvement. This more speaks to just the mindset of, I went out, okay, how many man hours does each of these components come out and what ops checks are associated with? Let me add up all the man hours we're spending doing this. And then okay, is there a reason we shouldn't be doing this? Yeah, I can show all these man hours because those man hours lost are man hours we could be working on all of these other issues, like pressing issues. And then I consolidated it all together and I made a proposal to the group commander. And he loved it. He said, let's do it. Like, go. I think his email was, looks good, go. And I was like, great, let's do it. And then I immediately turned around and started doing it. And unfortunately, the intervening command structure was dissatisfied that I had circumvented. I would argue that it was solicited. And the onus should have been on the group commander to go down to them and go, does this check out with you? He didn't, and it was a go. And ultimately it kind of got destroyed, although there was no explanation for why it got destroyed, except maybe just ego a little bit. But that also goes back to the rapid change versus the Air Force bureaucracy, because there's so many sort of protective layers between the field and the person with the authority to change things. Like that is something that I think should be a continuous improvement for how the Air Force processes its change management. Because I think we say what we want to do, and I think we're not very, very good at doing it, is what I'll say.
Right. And yes, it's a struggle, and it's very much dependent upon who's in what seats throughout that chain. To give you a story on the opposite end of that same spectrum, I remember I was told to go fix something. And those were always tough for me when you're told what to go fix, because you don't know what the underlying issue is, why they're saying to go fix it. And I've been told that many times. But this one in particular, I was told to go fix phase, the flow days for it. And I was told by, I think it was the vice group commander. And so I was really, I'm like, okay, so I go and I look at all the data. I looked at I think it was about a sample of maybe 10, 11 jets to see how early or late or on time they were coming out of phase. And, there's statistic stuff I could throw at you, but I think the most kind of common ones is you look at what is the average, you look at what is the number that happens the most, and then you look at the standard deviation. So the number that happened the most was 0, meaning it was on time more often than not. The average was a 0.09. So if anything, you're talking an hour and a half before or after the due date, right?
Oh, wow.
And the standard deviation was a negative 0.5. So, I'm sorry, not a negative, was a 0.5. So that meant half a shift was the variation. So I went and I said, hey, look, yeah, we could look at this, but what's really the value here?
Yeah.
And it was like, well, I want you to anyways. So I said, okay. And I looked at it from a different way. I did the time study, and then I went to them and I said, a process before process improvement will have about 30% touch time. And I showed them the engine one, right? 30% touch time, meaning tools are on that piece of equipment 30%. After an improvement, it went up to 63%. When you look at phase was already at 65% of touch time. They already had a really great process. Why go focus on this thing when there's so many opportunities that are, and eventually I won. But it took, that constant pushback. When people say go do something, a lot of times I'd have to say, but it doesn't make sense. Right. And be that voice for airmen, because you don't want to put them in a room for 5 days to get maybe this much, something so minuscule. Same spectrum, what you're talking about, where you want something done, but then somebody comes and interrupts, and you're wanting change, but on the other side, they want change, but it's not the right time or place to do it.
Yeah. So I had probably 2 interactions with organizations after my military career. I don't think I didn't work at either of them. It was someone that was close to me, worked in them, and they would tell me. And I don't know how many times I said, you need continuous improvement at your work for sure. And just listening, and I don't know, I think I developed like a bit of an efficiency sort of obsession being an expediter, because you're very much trying to stack resources. You're trying to time everything up, and it's like you're chasing all these efficiencies, and it drives you nuts when you see people standing around or you see these things waiting to be done. And they would tell me about this production that was just like, this is the only person that knows how to work this machine, and then this is the only machine that can do it, but it does 2 different things. So if it's doing the other thing, it has to wait, and there's this backlog, and it goes to this machine and then it'll reverse back in the production cycle. And I'm like, how is this company making money? I don't even, and like, that was before I really had the epiphany that continuous improvement had a lot of value. And it's like, I think the Air Force spoiled me because even before, continue AFSO 21, we still had like processes, like almost Air Force generationally, that had been built kind of through TOs and then just social norms within those career fields. It was almost like a informal transfer of process information and stuff like that, where you get a little bit locked in because nobody wants to deviate, but also it's kind of vetted a little bit. And then when I was spit out into the civilian sector and I saw what an organization looks like where there is no process analyzation or organization, that was the very first time I was like, I wish I had gotten my green belt, my black belt. I could walk into this place. I could make a killing because their money is going to go through the roof if this is streamlined, if they give me the authority. And then that's always the question, if they really give you the authority. But it's like, never mind the money. It's like, I just can't stand to see this mess. And what was really disturbing was they were providing equipment for the military. So it's like, what is the quality of the stuff they're giving up to the military? This is wild. But I think a lot of people take for granted continuous improvement in the military. And when you come out in the civilian sector, I think if you're fortunate enough, you'll never see a company that doesn't have process improvement. You always has something in the works. But if you do, it is a crash course in exactly why continuous improvement is so valuable, is what I'll say.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can't agree with you more in that regards. It's funny that you talk about that. I see it now. A lot of times I'm with my family. We'll go, to the grocery store or something like that. And they will see something just ridiculous. Like, how much you could help them. And it's like, yeah, but I've learned to just kind of ignore it, right? They're not paying me. I'm not going to give my time away. If they want to do it, they'll do it. And I've just learned to kind of let that stuff go. Otherwise, I would drive myself nuts. Like, oh, we could do this, and so forth. But yeah, you're right. I didn't actually think about it that way, about maybe a little bit how spoiled we were. But again, I think that's what I mentioned earlier. The Air Force really set me up for success.
Very much
I
so.
owe a lot of my success to it.
Yeah. So what's coming up in your future?
Yeah. So honestly, I'm hoping now that, the pandemic maybe is on the downward trajectory, maybe can start getting back into conferences again. I actually am speaking at a conference next month, but it's virtual. It's for the Association of Manufacturing Excellence in Australia. So it's their national conference. And I'm speaking on my tailed fishbone that I created to help kind of practitioners facilitate root cause analysis, make it easy. And then with that, I'm hoping to be able to talk at a little bit more conferences. I used to do that just about every year, talking at international conferences. And I think it's a lot of fun to be able to work with, my peers and learn from each other. So that's always exciting. Right now, I'm the global chair for, my company established a lot of employee resource groups. So working with our chief of diversity and inclusion, saying, hey, look, what are we doing for veterans? That got me to be the global chair for our veterans employee resource group. So standing that up, being able to drive more veterans into the organization and internationally. So it's not even just Americans, but internationally is really an exciting time right now. And then add that with, my current job of applying this process improvement stuff to our customer satisfaction piece has really given me an opportunity to do new things. And so, yeah, that's what's going on with me and what the future looks like.
So you've already kind of talked about how you adapted the fishbone to be a tail fishbone. So it sounds like there was a little bit of an evolution in that theory. What do you see process improvement doing in the next decade? Like, what do you see changes on the horizon? I mean, that's what a lot of these conferences are, is just cross-pollination of theories and information, right?
Yes. When I first started going, I noticed that a lot of the times the conferences were really around, some basic things. A lot of the materials was on basics and not much was on advanced skill sets and tools. And so I'd as a customer, keep asking for it. I'd like to see more advanced stuff. But I think that leads into the answer to your question. When I went through Black Belt Academics back in 2010, I think it was, so 11 years ago, I asked my instructor, I said, I'm really excited when I leave the Air Force to do this stuff full time. And he said, the job won't be there for you. There won't be any. And I was like, what? And so that kind of set a clock for me that I had to get as much experience as possible, had to get my certifications, and then I had to go find my opportunity before it disappeared. And so I ended up leaving active duty after 14 years and went to the reserves, just recently retired. But if I was to now be put in that exact same location, having that exact same conversation, essentially the question you just asked me, I'm not thinking there's going to be much difference. I think that you're going to have more organizations that have it as part of their cadre or culture. And so people will have awareness, but you're going to need subject matter experts who can navigate that culture, who can start creating some really continuous improvement opportunities. I know our organization has, a lot of, we call them business excellence people who can help facilitate those, but a lot of it is also culture. We understand what the tools are. We can take a team and we can break out and we can go do what we need to do without anybody from business excellence to help guide, because we've just been doing it for so long. So when you look at other organizations, I think they're going to need that guidance, and then I think that guidance is going to grow. So I don't see this going anywhere. Instead, I see there being a need for specialization. Being able to help the teams facilitate, I think, is a really strong skill people are going to need to have. And right now, a lot of the green belt and black belt academics don't teach facilitation. That was actually something I added to my own academics, was to get people to understand how to communicate up the chain, down the chain.
That's interesting. Across. You'd think that would be cooked into the black belt just because of the way it's their position, I would imagine, because they are facilitators, right?
They are, but they give you team dynamics. They talk about how to recognize when somebody's maybe abdicating, so they're giving you some things. But what they haven't done is said, here's a process map. This is the way to facilitate it. This is what you're looking for out of your team. In the current state, you're expecting people to abdicate. It's brand new. They don't know what they're supposed to be bringing to this yet, and so I have a lot of facilitation techniques where I will get the 3 level or somebody who's outside the process, and they'll be the one who's posting the process up on the wall, because they're getting to learn. At the same time, I have my subject matter experts thinking and providing the information. So they're available to talk, where these people are learning, like, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to do that right there. So they get to learn while they're going through this. And that's all part of facilitation techniques that we don't teach, but I've learned and have now added into my academics and mentoring.
So how much do you think your kind of success as a facilitator is a combination of, obviously, the continuous improvement training, green belt, black belt, lean, Six Sigma, coupled with time in the military where you're just used to leading teams and being in teams, seeing good leaders, bad leaders, understanding what people want, and then just also natural aptitude, because obviously that's going to come into play as well. But I guess the question is, do you think a facilitator that is outside the military would be at a little bit of a disadvantage if they didn't have the same sort of interactions with teammates, supervision, mission needs and technical expertise that you have?
I think you do need to be able to relate with the working with. I think the reason why I was able to do so well in the maintenance side was I was a maintainer. If you would have brought somebody from the med group or services to facilitate a flight line shift change initiative, they maybe not would have listened. So I think part of having that bond allows a little bit of credibility, and then your subject matter expertise brings you up. So yes, you're right. Having that, being able to lead teams, all that is absolutely right. But I remember I walked in to the company I'm in now, and I met my counterpart at the customer side, and it's like, hey, it's nice to meet you. What's your background? I was like, Air Force. And he's like, so what'd you do kind of quality side? And, we'd talk about maintenance and stuff. And he's like, no. I mean, we're in manufacturing here. I don't understand the correlation of your experience to what it is that we're trying to do. And he stepped out, went to my boss, and it was like, who'd you just hire? He's like, no, trust me. And, but then we got their scrap rates that they'd always been talking about being too high, got those knocked way down within the first 90 days of being on the job. And so all of a sudden everything was great, right? It's like, oh yeah, yeah, Mark's a good guy. But I had no manufacturing experience. I didn't know their product. I was just a process person. And it was, again, establishing credibility. And so, yeah, it's different. but being able to communicate, I think, with your peers. So now I can go to manufacturing firms and I can speak their language, and you have that instant credibility. Same with the Air Force. I could go speak Air Force stuff. I could go speak maintenance stuff, and I can even go speak medical stuff because of my improvement initiatives I've done in the medical community. So yeah, you have to be able to speak their language.
Okay, so it's about time to wrap up. Do you have any final thoughts, any takeaways you want the listeners to kind of get from this episode?
Yeah, if you are thinking about doing, getting into process improvement, you were talking about it, getting my green belt, getting my black belt, things like that. I can honestly help with anyone about, is this a good school or is this a good program? But I would say you want to be able to take that academics, that certification, and tie it with actual experience. And I think that's really where the value lies. When you talk about my journey through all of this, it wasn't just because I had a certification. I've facilitated, I think, around 75 initiatives from the time I started to the time I left service. And that is what allowed me to, work and do well in this field. So yeah, education is a big part of it. Experience is another big part of it. So don't let people tell you no. Go work within that span of control, even if it's improving scheduling people for fitness tests. And that's how you get there.
No, I was going to say the exact same thing, so I'm glad you said it. I regret not getting the certifications, getting the training, but much like when I was attacking that without certifications or training, much like I was attacking that process for that part change in the aircraft and all the thrash it kind of generated, that was in my span of control. I was a section chief, and eventually I became a lead super, and I just pulled the trigger and I said, we're going to do it anyway. That was a process. I wasn't going to the group. I went to the group commander for a blessing, but I didn't have to leave my universe in order to affect change. If I had a green belt and or a black belt, it probably would have given me a little bit more credibility. I might have actually been able to sell everyone up the chain if I had done so. I might have been able to speak the language better, because I'm sure there's terms of art associated with it that I probably just didn't know. It very likely hindered my ability to advocate for a positive change. But it goes to the two things. I wish I had gotten the certification, certainly before I got out, and you can use the tools you learn on the smallest scale possible. If you're a DCC and you have an assistant, you can still streamline your jet, who you want to do what shift they're on. If they're on mids, you're like, okay, well, I want you to do this with the jet every single day. And then we can make sure by the end of the week, everything's all taken care of. That's the process we're going to have on our jet. You don't have to have this grandiose sort of level of authority or these 300 people underneath you to do process improvement. The process, I would also argue the smaller the process, the easier it is to do the changes on it, because you don't have to get buy-in from 100 people. You have to get buy-in from 3, and if you're the authority and you're doing process improvement, you don't have to check with anybody either. So it's empowering, and it's something that you need to develop. And as you do those smaller projects, you move up in rank, you move up in authority, you can do bigger and bigger projects until you retire. And you have 75 projects underneath your belt. And then, you can move into a non-aircraft maintenance field, because you have this whole other toolkit available to you, much like what Mark has done. Other than that, thank you very much for joining us, Mark. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm a big fan. Honestly, I've listened to so many of the podcasts, and I really started when you brought in Vic Mora. He was a big fan. He was the one who was really giving me the opportunity to lead. And so, yeah, I've heard just about every single one of them since. You're really doing a fantastic job. So thanks for letting me be a part of this.
He was not paid for that endorsement. I just want to be clear. But thanks, Mark. Until next time, adios.